Hi, I'm Doug O'Brien. Welcome back to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. Today is part two of my interview, at least my first interview with Charles Faulkner. Charles, as you know, if you listened to the first one, is a remarkably widely read and incredibly intelligent person who's been doing NLP not quite as long as there's been NLP, but for a very long time, and brings a lot to the table. And we're going to get right back into our conversation because I really want to find out how you do, or according to his modeling expertise, the subjective reversal of Dave Dobson. And just, gosh, I could talk to him for hours. Here we go, Charles Faulkner. You are listening to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast, a show devoted to uncovering the systems and the secrets that set the best apart, where you learn how to take your coaching clients to the next level, while you grow the coaching practice of your dreams. So sit back and relax, or sit up and get excited. Either way, you might want to pay attention. This could be important. Welcome back, Charles. We haven't really been gone very long, but it's nice to see you again. It's been, minutes since I saw you last. But for our listeners who haven't been here for the past few minutes, we were talking about a lot of things NLP related, but particularly your systems model, dual systems model. So let's just recap where we were and then pick up from there, if you would.
Okay, well, first, it's not it's Evans. He's got a long name. It's kind of like Brian Eno has his really long name, and there's guy St. Evans is his name. He's one of the principal researchers in dual process theory. Unless you like to spend a lot of money on books, you won't buy it. It's an academic book, of course, expensive. Again, Wikipedia, lots of places you can go to find out about dual process theory.
Okay, good.
As I say, I use it as a way of gathering insights and ideas that I've learned in trainings with people like Stephen Gilligan, and of course the Grinder and Bandler, and I worked for many years with the Andreases and so forth in the NLP area, and also branched out and of course branched out into Dave's work at the encouragement of a colleague. So what I covered in the first section was basically to lay out the idea that we are information processing creatures. That would be the NLP model, really, and that we do so with our bodies, and that we do through multiple systems, which in fact have an intelligence of their own that's distinct to each of them. And that, when you try to have the conscious system 2 running, and I point at my head because most people point at their head. It doesn't have to be in the head, actually, but that's where most people point. And the whole body, because we now know that the representational systems go through the whole body, as I was explaining with the different cues that you can get. That's like having the rider on the elephant, running the elephant. Now, it can be directed. You can consciously direct yourself to pay attention to the road when you're driving. You can consciously, look at a menu and pick something out. Although even then, you go with the feeling. As Eric Oliver said years ago, is that decisions are more often realized than they are made. And of course, a chief example of that would be like, and I'm going to sound sexist, but that's my age. Do you like blondes or brunettes better? Kind of thing. Well, you didn't decide that. You just discovered there was this leaning or an early experience. Or do you like milk chocolate or dark chocolate, to be more neutral about it? And we discover this, and we go, well, I decided. And no, you didn't. So it's like most things we discover, we already have these emergent preferences, again, based on early experience when we didn't have the experience and built up. And that as this experience builds up, it builds up distinctions in each of these systems, the visual, the auditory, and the kinesthetic, to pick out the most significant ones. And that these systems can be therefore more developed. They're in a certain sequence, and that is the person could be a visual to an auditory to a kinesthetic. They could be an auditory, kinesthetic, visual, and that these are going to create, these different strategies are going to create different abilities and different kinds of limitations. I know this for a fact because I was doing work with language learning years ago, and this designer, rather well known in Chicago, hired me to help him learn a language. and he wanted to go to Spain or someplace. And I discovered his strategy was to see something and have a feeling about it, and then rearrange it so that it would be more like he wanted it to be as a designer. And when that feeling, then he would begin to tell people what it was and draw it, of course.
What a great strategy for a designer. That's great.
It is. It's a terrible strategy for learning a language.
Yes, yes, it is.
Now, my wife speaks 5 languages fluently, and when she goes to another country, she starts to pick up the other language. And she doesn't have the auditory body type. She's not pear-shaped. That's also another thing, is that the different body types also indicate representational system preponderance. And but she would get traditional music from wherever it was, whether it was fados in Spain or whether it was children's songs in some other country. And then she would put those on and listen to them while she was cleaning or making dinner or something. And so she got the rhythms of the language in its traditional form. Because, of course, as Dave pointed out years ago, is that, well, Bateson actually pointed out, and Dave emphasized it, is that when there's a communication and there's a conscious communication, like if someone says, this makes me nervous, kind of thing. And you go, well, but they're saying it makes them nervous, but their head is like it's not, and their smile is like they're not making it nervous. And people will go for the other than conscious communication as being more important, as being the real, as Bateson would say, as being the real communication.
Right. And
of course, the emphasis there we're going to get into with subjective versal. It's both. You want to pay attention to both, but that kind of quote unquote simultaneous incongruence is something that we're going to be paying more attention to, and that tends to divide across representational systems. Again, a little ahead of myself. So we've got the development of the system. We've got what is the first system in, the primary coming in, and then we've got what's in and out of awareness. And where I left off last time is that some things, a lot of stuff's out of awareness because I'm not making my lunch, so I don't need to think about my lunch skills until I just said that.
There's millions and millions and millions of things that are outside of your awareness.
And that's good.
Yes, it is good.
This evolved this way for a purpose. It's like, our survival, our ancestors survived because they were not, thinking about something when they shouldn't have been.
Right.
And, one of the problems with like driving automobiles, which just for your audience sake is to know, is that is much more dangerous than people realize. And if you don't believe it, go work for a plaintiff's attorney for a while or read the article in the Atlantic. There are huge numbers of unreported accidents or accidents that go to court and all that. Well, why? Because of two reasons. One is that the demands of the situation exceed our ability. And the other is that most everybody's driving unconsciously.
Right.
And of course, they're driving the way they learned. And the map territory distinction from Korzybski, the territory is changing. There are more cars than ever, but they aren't making that many more roads.
Yeah, that's true.
And people are driving differently. And I'm only going on about this because this is the kind of dynamic system, complex system, that your client or a group of people, whatever it is, brings into the room. And so, you're not going to cure this with some conscious, orderly steps of something. So I'm going to show you something that I can recount as orderly steps. But I hope you appreciate by the end of this that there's a great deal of simultaneity involved in it. Right. So the person is blocked, meaning they don't have access to certain experiences. Now, one of my adages working in complex systems is never do anything for one reason. And although Dave never mentioned complex systems, he lived there. Because that exercise we talked about earlier about aligning all the rep systems when you're talking. So you're doing the visual and you're seeing something and you're doing a visual gesture at the same time. That was a training exercise for you, but it was also a training exercise for you to notice when other people aren't doing that. Are not doing that, right. Because the difficulties that people have, according to my understanding of Dave, is when they have some experience that's blocked, for example. And they will say, well, I just have an uncomfortable feeling.
Right. So they're looking up so that you can tell that they're visually accessing, but they're not not talking about that. They're saying, I feel bad about this.
Right.
And they don't know what it is that they're feeling bad about because the visual is not actually in their consciousness.
Right. And if you point out, well, what are you seeing? And they'll go, nothing. and that indicates a block something or other.
Yeah.
Now, traditional therapies, including NLP, the idea would be to bring that into awareness. And Dave was emphatic about not bringing it into awareness. My own appreciation later on was that, well, you don't need to bring it into awareness. It's not so much you shouldn't. I mean, you're basically abusing the person by telling them that they're seeing something that they're not seeing. So it's kind of like, it's a form of beating up your client. So I don't recommend it.
Right.
But what we're looking at there is a synesthesia pattern. The person is seeing something and having a feeling. And that's really one of the keys to what I understood that Dave was doing, is that people will have, and the preponderance of their difficulties will be across the synesthesia pattern. So if it's auditory to kinesthetic, like they're hearing voices and, and they're feeling bad about them, but they don't actually hear the voices. It's curious to me, there recently were some experiments done where this psychologist had people, they got little messages to check if they were talking to themselves, and 30% of the people said they never talked to themselves, and and it's like, well, they never heard themselves.
Yeah.
And there are people that, like the designer I was talking about, who talk to himself a lot less than other people.
Well,
But
I've seen some professional dancers. My wife works in theater in New York, and I've seen some professional dancers who, I swear, they are totally kinesthetic. They dance for hours without count. They're clearly not counting steps or thinking what's next. Their body just does it. They're just moving.
Yeah.
They're totally kinesthetic.
Well, that's expertise. They started out, as all of us would, with dance classes, lift the leg and all that. But then later on, all of those complex patterns became so complex, or at least complicated, that they became other than conscious. Yeah.
It's amazing to watch. Please continue.
So here's one of the keys, is that when the person is experiencing something that's blocked, it'll be in a representational system, one of them, or more, but certainly one. And they will typically, as a synesthesia pattern, I'm defining it as some central nervous system reaction by the autonomic nervous system. So they're seeing something they're responding to, or they're hearing something they're responding to, or they're hearing something on the outside they're responding to, or possibly, and I don't see this as often, but possibly, well, yeah, of course I do, something that they're responding to in terms of musculature. I was just thinking, the reason I do this, of course I have plaintiff clients who are in pain. And so, yeah, I mean, that's something that I look at in jurors, when I'm seeing a juror and I can see them, and they'll wince, and they didn't look anywhere. It was like their bodies, they indicate by their bodies that, they experienced something in their body and had a reaction to the pain. In other words, they didn't just have the pain, they had an emotional reaction to the pain. And all of these are synesthesia patterns. So, and I'm claiming that people have a preponderance of that synesthesia pattern more than another one. Okay. Now, here's the secret. Client comes into you with a difficulty, and they begin to describe it. And at some point, they will do something. They'll look away, or something like that. And they will chuckle. They go, oh. If you check with them, they have no conscious recollection of doing that, of doing the chuckle or the ha-ha.
Really?
Dave never taught this that I was aware of, anyway.
I worked with 5
minutes. And in that moment, that's the synesthesia pattern, and that's the problem. Because if you ask them what they laughed about, they'll go, I don't know. And
they'll repeat it exactly.
They'll do this. I didn't.
Nice.
And so you now know what that synesthesia pattern is that you want to do a subjective reversal on.
How do you know? Tell me, just be explicit.
Because they are responding to something they heard or saw You know,
And you noticed which pattern they.
you can see the response.
So
I mean, you could go. I mean, I could go into more speculation that they hear something, it's disturbing to them, that uncomfortable feeling, and to relieve that feeling, they chuckle. But I'm speculating about that,
okay.
or the ha ha. But I
Yeah.
know that pattern, that they'll have an access, and then they'll have a response, and you'll see it in their face, you'll hear it in their voice,
Okay.
and at that moment, I go, okay, that's what we're going to work on.
Great.
Now, sometimes I need to let them carry on for another 15 minutes because they have to tell their story, but I already know where I want to go with that.
Gotcha.
And sometimes I do a whole lot of elicitation, and sometimes I see something and it's not supposed to happen. I did that. I was doing a postmaster program with Steve Andreas. I don't know if the videos of that are still available. And this woman was the demonstration subject, and I was doing something on the nature of explanations. The idea that we have a rationalization process that post hoc explains to us why we did what we did, which then is the first step of our next strategy. So it's actually, we're building a belief, like a recursive loop. And I was working with a woman, and it wasn't happening. And so I just did a subjective reversal at the end, and like 75 people in the room, and 2 people's hands shoot up and go, "What did you just do?" Because it's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I noticed is that I can get a person's, this other than conscious attention, I can get that more straightforwardly by doing their synesthesia pattern, which goes back to why it's really good to practice being able to do these congruent ones, because then you can purposely do an incongruent one. Again, you're elaborating your ability to do that. And so then at that point, I will do that. And if I see I got their attention response, they'll do it again. And then this is where I will say, okay, what I'd like you to do is, whatever we're talking about, that experience we're just talking about, is I like you to roll back before that experience. And they'll go, yeah. And I say, okay. And then, and I want you to pay attention here is, and I did this one. I said, then I want you to come forward through the experience, looking at my hand, looking at my hand, looking at my hand, looking at my hand, all the way through up till now. And what I just did is I introduced a different synesthesia pattern into that experience.
So how's that a subjective reversal?
That's what I took away from it.
Okay. But
I mean, I thought we'd get right into it and we could discuss, maybe I misunderstood it and I just invented something else. I don't know.
No, that's brilliant. Just, from my perspective, NLP is the study of subjective experience, and people have subjective responses to things all the time. A subjective response is simply a response that's, a feeling response that's their own. It's subjective. So that, if I saw a cat and was afraid of cats, that's my subjective response. I've got a phobic response or a fear of cats. So to reverse that would make it the opposite. I'd be attracted to cats. I like cats. They're nice animals. So that's my definition of a reversal would be to say, see cat, feel good, instead of see cat, feel afraid. So the response is reversed. Is that similar to the way you've understood it?
No, I understood. It's subjective reversal to me had something with reversing the direction of it, which is a later Bandler trick. And the thing is, by doing, and sometimes it catches right away. Sometimes I've done this as people are walking to the stage as I'm doing something, and I'll see them doing their nervous whatever, and I'll gesture. And this goes back to Eric Oliver gesturing at me, kind of in that I would do something, and obvious. I mean, I think Dave did this with his head, but I'm being, and also he did it when they were sitting and established in trance. And people get to the stage and go, I don't have that problem. And I know that's like showing off, but these things happen. Sometimes I've had to do it a couple times. Catching the experience is key. Catching the synesthesia pattern, And I might introduce another synesthesia pattern to it. So I went from the auditory remembered to the visual construct to kinesthetic, for example. And also I was doing the padding, which was to just interrupt them trying to talk to themselves.
Right.
So my behavior is organized on my part, is that I know what and why I'm doing it. And what I'm interrupting their pattern, and I'm redirecting their attention, and I end on the kinesthetic, which I'm now established as a visual kinesthetic.
Cool.
In the example I was showing you.
Yeah. Is there a different example that you could use to show a different subjective reversal that might not be the same visual with the auditory distraction and kinesthetic ending?
I mean, if they were seeing something,
Yep.
memory that was bothering them, and that would be a visual kinesthetic. That's the synesthesia pattern.
Right. So they see something, feel bad, but it's
Right.
unaware. They're unaware of what it is that they're seeing.
Right. And so you have them, that moment, that little clue, and whatever that is, I want you to roll back before that experience and begin to move forward, or clicking my fingers or something like that, which evidently is not working as well today. But, not words, just sounds.
Right. Cool. So they're trying to see a picture, but you're distracting them by all this, calling their foreground attention to all the sounds that are happening.
Well, yeah, I'm directing them to another rep system than the one that they were in, even though they're coming up through that experience, which was a VK. Right. And then when I get to the end of it, I'm going into kinesthetic.
Beautiful. Got it.
Or I go, that also works.
Right. And would you, Dave often injected humor in his stuff. Would you make it so at the end of this thing, they were not only just, kinesthetic relaxed, but, kinesthetic like laughing or anything? Would you inject humor into your subject?
I can't not do that. I don't think about that as part of what I do, but it is something I do. Yeah. It's something. I don't know whether it was Salvador Minuchin or the other guy that I got that from. Was somebody would say, well, it's a I don't know if it is or not, where they come in and they say, I've got a problem, and I look at them and I go, yeah, you do. You need to find somebody to dress you better. I don't know what I'll say. I mean, I don't say that. I don't have no opening. It's not. I'm planning that. Just like, something will come to me that I'll just say that something, that is, it appears to be off topic, and that part is on purpose. I'm throwing off the expectations. Oh, it's very serious. Problem, therapy, all that. It's like, I'm not a therapist. I'm not allowed to be a therapist anymore. There's laws changed in the 80s and 90s, and then coaching became popular, and I was a coach for a while, but almost all coaches are conscious mind. And again, I was kind of out there as a coach because I was, as I say, in the trading people, I was not working the right hand. I mean, I tell people up the right hand stuff all the time, but I work on the left hand. I give them assignments to read and things to come back and find out about the nature of outliers and fat tails and stuff like that. But then when we work, it's on the uncomfortable feelings and the ideas and the pressures and the messages they took from parents, money is bad and stuff like that.
Cool. So can you ever work with a person just over the phone?
I have, but I don't recommend it. And I have worked over the internet the last few years, and I also find that less than satisfying. It's like being in the room with the person and being able to utilize all the elevation and the distance and all these things, which are also, context. I did this modeling of the submodalities in terms of cognitive linguistics, and it worked much better than the mechanistic theory of submodalities. Are the brightness of something, or the closeness of the picture, or is moving or still, the sound, is it soft or loud, and so forth. And the pieces of the modality for those that don't have an NLP background. And in fact, the modalities are out in the world. That is that, we organize as creatures. We look forward to the future. We put things behind us. Things are over our head. Something's beneath us. It's out of reach. And all these other things that I can do, both with them, but also with my body relative to their body, to have a different impact than I would having them look at a screen and I look at a screen.
Am I right in remembering that you did a lot of work with metaphors about that realm, that the things being out of reach?
That was my early metaphor work was what became known as conceptual metaphors.
Okay.
And that was life is a game, life is a journey. Sports are war. Those one concept to another, and that's basically where George Lakoff and Mark Johnson started with the Metaphors We Live By. Still a really solid book.
Yeah.
And then they went on to, a few years later, they published Philosophy in the Flesh, which got into the underlying larger things about how Western society, I talked a little about in the last talk, about how these ideas of the earth being always in decay and the heavens appearing eternal and so on, how these ideas influence things. And then I elaborated that in my own way with the submodalities and other things. And I have a whole hierarchy of metaphors. Again, this idea of simple, clear, vivid, familiar is when you talk to use gritty metaphors, to use things people can really sink into, and using that kind of language will get a more receptive response than the typical psychological language, which shouldn't surprise anybody, but apparently it does.
Yeah, mostly psychologists.
I didn't say that. He said that.
Why don't they understand me? I'm using the perfect language for it. So that's brilliant, Charles. Thank you so much. This has been really enlightening to me about the subjective reverse of the way you've encoded that. So when you went to Dave's place in order to model him and you came away with this, did you then turn it into a model that's somebody else could do? Did you ever write about it or publish it or anything like that?
I hate to say this because I'm not that old, but all that comes kind of a blur to me now, because that was it was in the late 80s, I think, and early 90s. I saw Dave, and then it was involved with things in the late 80s. I became the executive director of NLP Comprehensive. I ran Stephen Connie Ray's company. While she wrote Core Transformation, and they both wrote, she and her sister wrote Core Transformation, and she and Steve wrote The Heart of the Mind. And that's what I was seeing Dave. This will make sense now. But they still let me take a break, and I would go and I spent like a long weekend with Dave, as I recall, like 4 or 5 days, programs he did. And I came back, and then in the early 90s is when I was putting out my metaphor work. And I put out the first one, which was Operating Metaphors and Iconic Change. Iconic change meaning you could change the visual of the metaphor to change the metaphor. And Operating Metaphors, which is I realized only afterwards was like a really silly choice, because operating had too many ambiguous meanings, like surgery.
Yeah. Right.
Tony Robbins took up my work and he called it Living Metaphors. And I thought, that was actually a good change. I wasn't happy I didn't get credit, but people don't get credit in Tony's books.
No, they don't.
But I think that was closer to it. It was a living metaphor, a metaphor person's living. And then after that, it came out The Mythic Wheel of Life, which was the nature of stories, how the 4 kinds of stories, and figure out which story the person was telling themselves and how this would influence their life. By the way, just so you know, the morning stories, midday stories, afternoon stories, night stories, or spring stories, summer stories, fall stories, winter stories.
Those are synonymous. Those are different representations of the same type of stories.
Yeah, they're the same model. And then that was followed a year or 2 later with Worlds Within a Word. And that was when I figured out that one word could have a whole metaphoric meaning. And I got that actually. I was working in Silicon Valley at the time when I thought of this. And it was this client I was working with was not taken, very smart person, was not taken seriously in her group, and said to me, "I want to matter, like a chair." And I was like, holy shit, I get this now. In other words, that same ambiguity about the word, or not, give me the right word, polysemy. It's a technical word in linguistics, meaning it means many things, a polysemy word. And like the polysemy of operating metaphor, the polysemy of wanting to matter. It was like wanting to be taken as seriously. Like if people saw a chair, they're going to step around it. But apparently, at least in this person's mind, people stepped through this person. They just ignored them. And so that began a whole exploration of that kind of metaphoric language, and also the metaphors of space, like a container. That's because most people are stuck in a state, or they can't get out of something. And so that whole metaphoric configuration and how to change that. And then also about goals. Goals are source path goal, which is a gestalt. I'm going into the work of Mark Johnson, The Body and the Mind. And so I did a lot of work with that. So I was doing a lot of things at once. I put out those. I worked on New Technology of Achievement, and the tapes came out in like 92 or 93. And then the book came out in 95, I think, 94, 95. So I didn't do much with the Dave work, except, that's why I bring this up, except when I came back from one of my trips when I was still Conyer Steve's executive director, and I was showing them what I showed you and your viewers just previously. And Conyer looked at me and she said, "Why don't you just do this?"
Really?
Yeah, she'd been working on the eye movement integration. And so if somebody had, and I don't know that she didn't talk about it that way then, and she doesn't do that now that I'm aware of. But the idea was that you could do this, what would do what? It would interrupt the visual kinesthetic synesthesia pattern. In other words, she would have the person go back to the experience and remember it and do this.
Right.
And
keep your eyes on my finger.
Yeah. And I went, well, I guess. To me, it doesn't seem as elegant as what I was doing, but maybe. So I was kind of chagrined that, the simplicity of that. And I've forgotten the woman who developed EMDR. And then
who, by the way, worked for John Grinder for a while. So she was
John Grinder's marketing director, and John Grinder tasked her with figuring out something that they could sell. She did, and she left.
And she did very well. Frances Shapiro, her name.
Yes.
Yeah. So brilliant stuff. So, and why you can just do this. And that's one of the things about NLP is they say they have been able to unpack what's working here. Why is this happening? It's like you're interrupting the synesthesia pattern. Okay, well,
they don't discuss how it works. They just discuss that it works. They'll do this, and then they'll do this, and then they'll do this, and then they'll do this.
Who's they?
The NLPers. And then Andy Austin picked it up.
Yeah.
And he has something called chronicities, which are these ideas people can't change. And then he looks at what the person's doing, and he has very specific things he does. Do this one while you're thinking of that. I read the book on it. I've watched some of his videos, and I know what the chronicities are. I won't go through them. You can find those online easily. Austin, just like this city in Texas. But I couldn't work out why they would work for what. And frankly, I wasn't that interested. I mean, he's also taken up my metaphor work and really run with it, a whole nother area. Which is good. I mean, there's a few areas where the field's actually advanced, as opposed to people who still are clutching their transformational grammar, going, but this is the text, it's like, well, it's an early text, we could have a New Testament, but I hope I didn't offend too many people with that one.
Well,
so now you're getting a taste of my humor, so
which I find delightful. And one more example, if you would, of how one might do a subjective reversal, and then we're going to have to call it a day here for our first set of interviews. Maybe there'll be dozens, but this will be at the end of the one. So one more example, somebody, let's say, comes in with a synesthesia pattern of something that's more of a, I don't know, can you have a kinesthetic synesthesia pattern? Something that's some touch, some smell, olfactory synesthesia? You smell something from about?
obviously, we obviously have all of these synesthesia patterns. And there's work on this, Crochell or something. I forget his name. Of course, I'm pointing at my library. I haven't read it in a while, but it's like, yeah, and they're all synesthetic. I used to teach in the UK. I'd open my seminars with, because they have them in big old university buildings. We close the drapes. They had drapes, and I'd have them close their eyes, and would put on music that would get progressively louder and louder. Very pleasant, but would start really soft. And then I'd actually obtained a large hot lamp, and I would with them, and I'd shine it over their bodies, as I talked about, being a one or multi-celled organism. And as they could feel that, and not really see it, and they'd hear the sounds, and they could feel the sounds in their bodies. And what I was endeavoring to do was to get them to realize that all the senses were originally one sense, and that by evolution, that the skin changed into these things called eyes over thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of generations, and the skin that could feel the vibration became more sensitive, closer to the central nervous system processor, and became ears and so forth. And so it's important to think that in these ways, all the senses are connected, and that with this process, what you're doing is awakening an old connection. One of my ideas that I've had for decades, and this goes back to my work with what I call metaphors of movement, which is that people would, when they got a successful way to getting to a goal, they would drop away all the other ways to get there, and they would begin to concentrate on using that method. So for example, with stuck states, Richard Bandler would go, well, you need to move faster. You need a suction to pull you to your goal, and you need all these, or a huge goal. And I noticed in Tony Robbins, it was always a breakthrough, and you break through boards, then you got to break through fire, and all these things, and they kept upping, rather than the very simple thing of going, well, what would be other ways of dealing with that? And if you go into the source path goal, there are like 9 different domains you can work with, but just along the path, you could go around, you could go under. You could have somebody bring the goal to you. You could go over. I mean, there was all these other things you could do. And so what I did in seminars back at that time doing the metaphor work is I'd encourage people to do one of the ones they didn't do, come back to the beginning, and then see the goal they wanted because they've drawn a picture of it, and then do another one that they didn't usually do, maybe 3, and then have them take a deep breath, let out slow, and the person would do another one I hadn't shown them. In other words, to go back to the subjective reversal, it's about freeing up the system again. One of Dave's things, if you want to end on something, then one of Dave's brilliant, simple things was that, you go, I wonder how soon I'll find I've changed. Or some other phrase. Right. Wonder, the only magic word. Well, careful here, because what you're doing is you're hitting each other. You're going, that's true. You're going, start kinesthetic, come over here and go, I wonder, up through the auditory here, how soon I'll find I've changed. And so basically what I think about these is each of the representational systems are resource centers in themselves. And also to Dave's thing is that your most developed representational system is your vocation, and your least developed system is your avocation or your hobby. So I would encourage clients to go out and do more of their hobby, because you want to develop distinctions in all these systems, and then you want to have them be able to connect in various ways.
Sweet.
And what subjective reversal did was to loosen that one path and open up the possibilities.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Charles. We will have you again, maybe based on our past record, might be a year from now, by the time I can get you back on this podcast.
People really want me back. We can do it sooner.
Oh, they do. They really do. Speaking for them, they want you back. So,
all right. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to finally do something together.
Absolutely. This has been the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure seeing you again. Hope to see you again real soon. Come back next week. when we have another gripping and exciting episode of the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. And if you want to, you can find out more about us, each and every one of us, at essentialcoachingskills.com. Thanks.